It's good to be here in Oxford again and to walk from the station through the city centre, through that particular mix of people you find in Oxford, the slightly cleverer siblings of the Made in Chelsea programme, mixing, or trying not to mix, with fugitives from the Jeremy Kyle show. And all surrounded by Japanese people taking selfies, and essentially that's modern Oxford for you in the frame. My problem is that I thought I was coming to speak in the sex workers debate, on the side of those who find sex very hard work indeed these days. But instead we're talking about, to a motion, about whether or not this House would never become an MP. This is actually, funnily enough, a choice I made, consciously made. Round about the time I first spoke in the Oxford Union, which was in 1981, I went to lunch because I was president of the National Union of Students. I wasn't entirely disruptive. I did do some useful things, or I thought they were useful anyway. If we were all judged on what we did in our first 21 years, as you will find, it would be bad, wouldn't it? It really would be bad. But I was doing some useful things, and I went to lunch with a guy called Neil Kinnock, who was then the Shadow Education Secretary for the Labour Party, and who within 2 years took up the poison chalice of the Labour Party leadership after they had been smashed to smithereens in the election of 1983. And Neil said to me, he said, you know, I've listened to you speak, boy, and I think you could do a job for the Labour Party, and I think really you ought to think about becoming a Labour MP. I thought about it, and essentially the choice came down to two possibilities. The one was to follow the course of becoming an MP, which to become a Labour MP in those days, what you'd have had to have done was probably leave the National Union of Students and get a job in a trade union research department, one of the ASTIMs or something like this. These acronyms will mean nothing to you now, but they were very big at the time. You would then go from there to try and get onto a parliamentary list. And then maybe you would find yourself in an unwinnable seat. You'd do that first. You'd stand in a couple of unwinnable seats where there was, you know, it was wall-to-wall Tories, and they still had hunting, and they still shot black people. And then, if you were very, very lucky, you might get a tilt at a winnable seat. Remember, Tony Blair went to Beaconsfield for his first seat. And you would then convince them, as Tony Blair famously did, but using all his charm, that you somehow or other embodied all the things that they wanted in that constituency by telling them everything that they wanted to hear. And you would grip them, and they would vote for you. And you would also, by the way, have to do some things behind the scenes about telling them why it was they shouldn't vote for the other people who were there, who might have made better MPs than you, but your job was effectively to defeat them. And then after you've done that, and you were possibly elected, let's say 5, 10, 15 years down the line, then in that case you could begin the business of doing what an MP did, which I had up until that point kind of imagined was a vastly extended version of what I'm doing right now, which is I could sound off forever in this kind of incredibly sort of clever way, etc., and have people applaud, etc. But it had begun to occur to me by then, actually running an organisation like the National Union of Students, that in fact people wouldn't on the whole applaud you because they weren't already, and actually wouldn't really very much be like that. We'll come back to that in a moment. And the other option was the thing that my predecessor had done, Trevor Phillips. He'd gone to work for London Weekend Television, and his first pay packet, was bigger than any backbench MPs and came pretty close to what a junior minister earned. Now, I wasn't impressed by that particularly at that stage. I wasn't material in those days. But it did strike me that there was something of an interesting imbalance there. One, you went for the job, you got it, and you exercised that status immediately, and you said what you want, and you did what you want. And the other way, you worked your way up through the nadgering system, effectively having to lie for a noble cause in order simply to get to the position whereby you could call yourself the Member of Parliament for a particular constituency. Now, I know that this is a debate between truth and moral beauty, and that I stand on the side of moral ugliness. I completely understand that. I stand for corruption against the forces of piety. I stand for things as they are in this debate versus things as they perhaps should be. I note, in standing for truth, there are no MPs on the other side, not even retiring MPs, not even a bishop, which is why we have the nearest thing, a Liberal Democrat peer, who will be very good, but is bound in this debate to be pious. And they were excellent and very pious opening speeches. Robert, who's relative in the audience, I think we appreciate your attendance here, but your laugh has to be slightly better timed in order not to give away your provenance. And Dia, who spoke to a crowd of implied motions, but not to the one that's actually here. And Robert, of course, you just made up any motion that suited you. So we had should never under any circumstances, you see that. And then should never. This is would never. So I want to say first, the thing about being a member of Parliament in the first instance, for most of you people, most of the time, it's the illusion of power. The reality is supplicancy. Change things you won't. No MPs do actually change things. It's a kind of, in saying this, I'm saying to you it's a variant of this House would not buy a lottery ticket. For the most part, the vast majority of you would not win the lottery or win anything at the lottery. For the most part, most of you, if you become MPs, wouldn't be able to do very much with it. You'd be one of 650 plus, 200 more than in the Indian Parliament to represent the 1.5 billion or 2 billion people that live in India for the 65 million odd people in the United Kingdom. You won't become Prime Minister. You won't become Foreign Secretary. You'll only be called to speak in the House when no one else is there and the press have long gone home, or unless you're called in Prime Minister's question time, in which case you have a choice of getting up there and saying, if you're on the Prime Minister's side, haven't you done a wonderful job, or if you're on the other side, haven't you done a shit job? Otherwise, what you will do is you'll open wet fates, speak to surly sixth formers who would rather be out blowing balloons. You'll be visiting hospices, all of which you'll have to tweet about in tones of unqualified delight. Fabulous afternoon with St John's Ambulance Brigade retirees and so on. You will be paid £10,000 more than the average Oxford graduate earns after 5 years at the age of 26, 27. That's what you'll be paid. You will be paid, in Australia, you will be paid 120k, Canadian MPs, 100k, Americans in Congress, 110, Japanese, 165. You'll get 65 here. And the reason you'll get 65, and this is what I find, where I laughed in that sort of terrible way when you said things will change, etc. Things will change in that parallel universe when you can imagine Alex Salmond sitting down saying, you know that independence thing, I've kind of changed my mind about that. I wonder if it's such a good idea. That's the circumstances under which that will happen. The other thing I wanted to say is, the opposition to the motion, put it in terms of your moral duty, really. This House should want to become MPs. Your country, said somebody, needs you. Let's talk about this House. This House is the Oxford Union. They have you already. They've got you coming out of the pipework. The only thing that is more unpopular than an MP is somebody who says that they've got a PPE degree from Oxford, and so on. Try it, try it, try it. You aren't needed. You won't represent a minority in the House of Parliament if you go to the House of Parliament. You are the one group of people who should be disbarred from joining the House of Commons. You aren't required. Actually, funnily enough, the motion, this House should never become an MP, is actually probably only true in this House. Precisely true in this House. But if there were no other reasons, let me just tell you this, the things that I get, which you don't get as an MP, or rather I don't get, which you do get as an MP. My expense claims are not public property, as they would be if you're an MP, nor are my texts to flame-haired editrices, lol. If anyone offers me a nice part-time job and tells me how wonderful I am and persuades me of my many achievements, then most likely I am not being recorded by a reporter from the Sunday Times. If anyone flirts with me, a nubile Oxford graduate of either sex, it won't be so they can trap me into sending a picture of my willy to them so that they can put it in the Sunday Mirror. But it will be if you're an MP. And at the end of all that, they'll hate you for it. You talked about this thing about the marathoneer. You said it's a bit like the public service. You might be a bit masochistic, but nevertheless, etc. You're doing good. All the way he was running that race, they were saying, "Go Noah, yeah, Noah." Being an MP is like running a marathon race when they all say, "Fuck off, fuck off, fuck off," all the way for the 26 miles. But finally, let me say, just in intellectual honesty, most of you, the vast majority of you sitting here, had no intention of becoming MPs, will not become MPs, will never become MPs, would never become MPs, and it would be pious lying of you to vote for the opposition and not for the proposition.